We begin with breaking news, though. Justice Stephen Breyer will retire from the Supreme Court at the end of his term in June.
President Biden is expected to make a formal announcement at the White House later this week. Justice Breyer has been on the high court for 27 years. His retirement comes at a critical moment for the Democratic Party. Breyer faced a lot of pressure from liberals to retire while a Democratic president was in office. Mr. Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris had previously committed to nominating a black woman for the role.
And Democratic Senator Patty Murray of Washington is echoing the administration's call. She says, quote, "The court should reflect the diversity of our country." Joining us now is senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe and congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Welcome.
Ed and Nicole, great to see both of you. Ed, let me start with you. The president addressed the news a little earlier. Let's listen to what he said.
Every justice has the right and opportunity to decide what he or she is going to do and announce it on their own. There has been no announcement from Justice Breyer. Let him make whatever statement he's going to make, and I'll be happy to talk about it later.
So, Ed, does that comment from the president indicate the sort of, sensitive position the White House is in? It doesn't want to look like it's pushing Justice Breyer out, wants to make it clear that this is his own decision?
Absolutely, that is what this is about. This is a former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee who actually was there when Stephen Breyer was nominated and had his confirmation hearing. Biden was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I believe, back in 1994 when he was put on the court. It shows you how long Joe Biden's been involved in judicial picks. This will be a big one for him. And as he said there's been no official word from the justice. That is true. What we've learned today is through associates of the justice, who is now saying that he plans to go at the end of the term, most likely at the end of June. But the president could, if Justice Breyer signals this in writing or somehow makes it official that he plans to retire at the end of the term, the president could get the ball rolling as soon as that letter of services or that announcement is made. And it certainly would seem that the Senate would like to get this done as quickly as possible as well for a few reasons. One, they only have 50 seats plus the vice president for 51. If something were to happen to one of those Democratic senators who happens to come from a state with a Republican governor, the balance of power could shift right away. That is part of the concern, the nervousness that Democrats have had all along. Second, it would allow the Senate to get on to other things in what is expected to be a tricky midterm election year. But the president had said since he was a candidate that he plans to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court, saying it is overdue, that bit of representation needs to happen, and that the diversity of the country in that way needs to be reflected on the highest federal court. We should point out, this has been a president who managed to get 40 federal court nominees confirmed last year, and it's been the most diverse slate of nominees put on the federal bench by any president, not only in terms of gender and ethnicity, but in terms of experience. These are people who are former public defenders, others who have served in different kinds of roles, not necessarily as local judges or attorney generals or district attorneys, but people who bring more varied experiences, if you will, to the federal courts. We'll see whether that plays out in his potential pick for the high court, but it is expected he will fulfill that campaign pledge.
Right, and Nicole, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer tweeted that President Biden's nominee will get a prompt hearing and will be confirmed with deliberate speed, he said. Is Schumer reacting this way because, of course, of previous nominations that were either held up or pushed through quickly by Republicans?
Well, I think obviously with Democrats in the majority here, that would be their aim, is to move this process along in a swift manner. Obviously, we have to wait for that official announcement from the justice first, and then secondly, for any type of official announcement from the White House as far as who they might nominate. But overall, with respect to reaction that we have heard from Capitol Hill, it has been a mix. Many lawmakers so far have been have applauded Stephen Breyer for his, 2 decades plus on the bench. And as you saw, some senators like Senator Murray really taking that step to say that she supports President Biden's pledge to nominate an African-American woman. Other lawmakers have been a little broader in their language, just saying that this presents an opportunity to present a diverse roster of candidates. That was the sentiment of Dick Durbin, who heads the the Judiciary Committee, other lawmakers, Senators Kaine, Gillibrand, talking about the importance of picking someone who is qualified for this position. So this is likely to set off the parlor game that we are used to, kind of when these vacancies arise as to who might fill some of these seats. Certainly one name that continues to be talked about a lot is Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is currently on the circuit court right now. She actually succeeded Merrick Garland, who, of course, went on to become Attorney General. But she is someone who once clerked for Stephen Breyer, was recently appointed to the bench, and did have bipartisan support. So what is interesting to note is that in a statement from Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, he actually suggests that whoever the president puts forth, that he may not necessarily support that person. In essence, he said that he expects Democrats to hang together, and if they do, that they may have to do that without the support of one Republican lawmaker, suggesting that that might be him. So he also applauded Stephen Breyer's service as well. But I do think it will be interesting to watch, because as you know, the dynamics here on Capitol Hill have been highly partisan, highly charged, and that usually is the case surrounding not only legislation, but also with respect to these Supreme Court nominations, which get a lot of attention. There certainly has been a lot of bad blood over the years between how Republicans handled the situation when they had vacancies versus now. You know, again, you have a Democratic president in control. So that's why you are seeing Leader Schumer be very forthright in saying that we will try to move quickly on this as the situation presents itself.
But Ed, just to be clear, Democrats could push through a nominee on their own without use of the filibuster on this one, correct? And secondly, I want you to comment on how this news got ahead of the announcement from the justice himself. Was this a leak on the part of someone in his staff, one of his clerks, perhaps?
We don't know. We simply don't know. And all we know is that this is different than how it's happened in recent history. There's been the sudden death of justices in the case of Antonin Scalia. There's been formal announcements, usually in the form of a letter from a justice to the president saying it is my intent to step down on a certain or specific date. Then the president makes it known that that's happened, or the Supreme Court does, and then the ball rolls from there. In this case, it's people close to the justice who've let it be known to others. What is less certain, there is some reporting on this, but we haven't nailed it down, as to whether or not the justice may have somehow spoken with or conveyed to the president in recent days of his plans. White House officials aren't getting into that, but it's clear White House officials were aware of this before the news broke, and as were others around town. A few lawmakers who I've contacted wouldn't get into the details of it either, which would suggest that at least some of them knew. Can we go back to that list, though, of potential nominees? I think it's important that we tick through these, if you don't mind. Nicole mentioned Ketanji Brown Jackson, who serves here in D.C. She actually succeeded Merrick Garland, who's now the Attorney General. She took his seat. J. Michelle Childs, who's at the top of that list there, is a federal district court judge in South Carolina, a protege, a favorite of the Congressman Jim Clyburn, who everyone will remember was a kingmaker during the South Carolina 2020 primary. Said he endorsed then former Vice President Biden for president, in part because of his vow to put a black woman on the court. Clyburn noting he's got 3 daughters of his own and thinks that it's time to see a woman on the high court. The other 2 names, Candace Jackson Akawumi with the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in Chicago. She won her confirmation just last June. And then California Supreme Court Justice Leandra Kruger, who's a 44-year-old on the high court of the Golden State, from the home state of Kamala Harris, the vice president, who, of course, is going to have a say in this matter. But those are 4 of what is likely to be a longer list of people, but 4 names that have been mentioned in public speculation and haven't been rejected either by the White House or Senate Democrats or others as a potential pick. If you're looking for the most traditional route to take, who possesses that right now and might be a front runner in that regard, it would be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, because she's on the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. That is the court from which, again, Merrick Garland had been nominated before his nomination was rejected. The court where Brett Kavanaugh served beforehand, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg had once served, sort of seen as the second highest court, just by virtue of location and the court decisions that it makes, or the cases it hears on its way to the Supreme Court. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see her come out. Perhaps the most unconventional would be somebody like a state Supreme Court justice, Justice Kruger, or Justice Childs, Judge Childs, just the fact that she's a district-level federal judge and not an appeals court judge. And there's the potential for the president, again, to make history and to diversify the bench, not necessarily in gender and in ethnicity or race, as it would in this case by putting a black woman on the court, but also in terms of experience. We've had very few Supreme Court justices who were not appeals court judges beforehand or a state Supreme Court judge, and so potentially he could go that route. But as you can see on this list, these are women with their own certainly impressive legal credentials and have been put into the pipeline, so to speak, by Democrats in anticipation of or the possibility of rising one day to the high court. So we'll see.
And Nicole, you just mentioned Senator Lindsey Graham's tweet about Breyer's replacement, in which he wrote that if all Democrats hang together, which he expects that they will have the power to replace Justice Breyer in 2022 without one Republican vote in support. I mean, is this normal to assume that the party that's not in power will forever and ever completely reject a nominee? Is this the pattern? Or do you see maybe a window of hope that there is some kind of bipartisanship in the future?
Well, I think it depends who is named, number one. But number two, I think the aim is always to try to do things in a bipartisan fashion and, go through the process. But obviously, there is bad taste left in Democrats' mouths from the situation with Merrick Garland, where he was nominated by then former President Obama. And in essence, Mitch McConnell at the time held up that nomination. And so then, fast forward to when President Trump was in office, former President Trump, and, with all of those vacancies and, the deliberate effort to try to fast track a number of conservative judges to the bench. And so that being said, it's hard to predict, but I think the goal again here, as lawmakers try to say, is always bipartisanship, but in reality, that doesn't necessarily happen. And as I mentioned earlier, particularly in this hypercharged political atmosphere that we are in, where we have really seen Democrats, as far as a lot of pieces of legislation, try to do it on their own, and some of that has not necessarily been successful. So will they succeed if they try to advance, Supreme Court nominations solely on their own? Again, unclear, but I think time will tell as, again, we see this process play out.
And Lilia, real quick, in terms of Lindsey Graham, it's important to point out he was one of 3 Republican senators to vote for now Judges Jackson and Judge Jackson Akawumi just last year. He, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski were the only 3 Republicans. And folks may remember, having watched the Brett Kavanaugh hearing especially, when he tore into Democrats for going after the now justice the way they did during the hearings by saying, you're not helping us here. This is character assassination. It's unbecoming of the history of the Senate. And he kept pointing out, I voted for Judge Sotomayor. I voted for Justice Kagan as a Republican supporting a Democrat's supporters or nominees. Why aren't you doing that same thing now to help a Republican put his nominee on the court? To me, reading that tweet, what Senator Graham is signaling is the days of him helping a president of the other party put his Supreme Court picks on the court are over. And that this White House shouldn't necessarily anticipate that Lindsey Graham would be on board, unless perhaps he chooses Judge Childs from South Carolina, where Lindsey Graham is from. And it would be a bit weird to see Graham and Republican Senator Tim Scott potentially vote against one from their own state. So that's the type of politics that will get played in this. There's some home state stuff going on. There's ideology. There's partisanship. And it's just another ugly fight that will get added to all the other ones going on in this city.
And there have been many. Ed O'Keefe and Nicole Killian, thank you for your reporting and analysis on this breaking news.
Pete Williams joins me now, who broke the story exclusively on NBC News just now. Pete, talk to us about the importance, the significance of Steve Breyer stepping down and what you think is probably his thinking.
Well, as you know, Andrea, there was a discussion at the end of last term about whether he was going to step down. It was clear that he had thought about it and then decided not to do so. He said publicly at the time He had just written a book about the Supreme Court and about its legacy and why the country follows Supreme Court decisions. And he said that he didn't want the timing of his retirement to be seen as something political. So apparently he has decided that enough time has passed that that's not going to be a concern now. Of course, there was enormous pressure on him and has been since President Biden was elected, especially after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which gave Donald Trump a chance to appoint Amy Coney Barrett to the court. There was lots of pressure on Breyer to step down, despite the fact that he's in good health, so that his successor could be chosen while there's still a Democrat in the White House and a Democratic control of the U.S. Senate. So the fact is that whether that is the reason he's stepping down or not, that is the consequences, what it will be. In order to give the Democrats a chance to keep the current 6-3 split on the court, conservatives and liberals, with Justice Stephen Breyer being the senior liberal on the court, followed by Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan against the six conservatives. But our understanding is that his intention is to step down at the end of the Supreme Court term, which would be in late June or early July, rather than the sometimes customs that Supreme Court justices follow, where they say that they will step down upon the confirmation of the Senate, the nomination and confirmation of their successor. And it may be that Justice Breyer wants to make it a little more urgent for the Senate to act in order to get his successor confirmed. And the White House, as you know, Andrea, the president has said that he was committed to appointing a black female to the Supreme Court. And the two names that have come most often up are Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's a federal appeals court a judge here in Washington, and Leonda Kruger, who is a justice on the California Supreme Court, Judge Brown Jackson, rather, district court judge here in Washington. So those are two names that we'll undoubtedly be hearing a lot more of in the coming days. But I think it's important to say that, as far as we know, this has nothing to do with the justice's health. He's 83, he turns 84 in August, and he's, certainly in fine health as far as we know. So I don't think that's the decision. But I think maybe he's decided that after 28 years, it's time for him to move on. And so we expect the formal announcement, the formal notification to the White House to come within the next 24 hours or so, and then perhaps some sort of formal recognition of the fact that this is happening.
Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer is retiring, and this is according to NBC News first reporting this. And of course, we know that gives President Joe Biden a crucial opportunity to replace the liberal justice. Now, Emily, I'm coming right back to you and your legal acumen. Play this out for me. He leaves, and what do you see happening immediately?
That President Joe Biden will nominate another justice. And we know that, so just a few months ago, he nominated 2 new federal appeals court judges, right? One including a South Carolina judge that some saw as a U.S. Supreme Court contender. That was U.S. District Judge Michelle Childs, and that was to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Now, I think what's important to note as well, that this would have an impact, obviously, on the scale of the court in general. This is considered, frankly, a win for the Democrat Party, a win for the progressive liberals. But that being said, let's dig into the background of whoever he does nominate and look forward to that being a contentious process, as we've seen in the past, Harris.
Kaylee.
Yeah, look, this would not change the balance of the court, but it could deliver the White House a much-needed political win, Harris. This is big news. This is right before the midterms. Yeah, I imagine this would have went into Justice Breyer's calculus. Any Supreme Court justice thinks about who they want to appoint their replacement. So I think he knows the balance of the Senate could change. Right now it's 50-50 in the Senate. So the best chance of getting a judge that would walk in the footsteps of Justice Breyer would be to have President Biden nominate that justice, get that person through before the midterms. And look, I was in the White House when we nominated a Supreme Court justice just before a presidential election, and that was Justice Amy Coney Barrett. That's about as clean as a nomination you could have and about as easy of a political victory you could have when you have a nominee of such character. But these could be thorny issues, Harris. We all remember Justice Kavanaugh, a great man. I think he's a great justice. However, no one knew the kind of way Democrats would play political football with his past, with his childhood. So it's not a given that you would get someone through. They have to have a good nominee, someone like Amy Coney Barrett, at least with a clean record, easy to confirm just before a crucial election.
So I really want to get into some of what we've seen, though, Guy, and that is this idea that it's too close to an election to get something like this through for a president. We've seen it among Republicans. We've seen Democrats do this as well. It's January, and you can't miss the timing of how far out that is from November. It's not March, it's not May, so on and so forth. What do you make of how much time President Biden would have to put something through? And as Kayleigh just pointed out, you pretty much have to pick somebody perfect at this point because you don't have a stall time.
Let's also not forget that Biden promised on the campaign trail that no matter who retired or died from the court, if he had an opportunity to replace that person on the high court, he would pick a black woman. So that narrows the field of potential names probably being discussed right now in the White House. I would imagine that there are a lot of conference calls and Zoom calls between the president's team and the Senate Majority Leader to make sure that they don't screw this up. Right now, they have the votes in the Senate. I would imagine the Democrats are probably going to stick together on this one, and they will replace Justice Breyer, likely with an African-American woman. I think they'll have the time to do it. I think they will maybe barely have the votes to do it. And I think, yes, it is true, Kayleigh's point is right, that this would be a victory for the Biden administration and for the president, and the base will probably be happy about that. There's also the other side of it. This will also fire up the Republican base and remind people that, okay, in this case, the ideological balance on the court would not shift. It would be one, progressive justice to another. But these are very high stakes battles. There's a lot at stake in control of the Senate, for example. So I'm not sure on balance if it would benefit one party or the other. I just think that in all likelihood, we're going to see a black woman nominated and a black woman confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court if indeed these reports about Justice Breyer are true, and the timing would suggest, in my mind, that it would make sense that they would be true.
Look, we are projecting recent past onto present, and we don't know what will happen next. But based on the facts that we have seen, what you were describing, and you too, Kayleigh, in terms of this, continues to make it feel like the U.S. Supreme Court is in the middle politically. Do you see it that way, Guy?
Well, I mean, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court, the decisions that are being written as we speak, I mean, the court's going to rule on guns, on abortion, on, racial preferences and college admissions, some of the most divisive, polarizing, hot-button issues in our society often come down to the court. I think that's unfortunate. I think that the court has overreached, and I think having some of these decisions sent back to the people's representatives would be the right course of action. But because these huge issues often end up before 9 lawyers, of course, the politics for people like us immediately jump to the forefront when news like this breaks.
Yeah, so Tommy, I think what Guy was saying previously is also very interesting because, and I think Kayleigh and Emily said it too, this doesn't change the makeup of the court. It does give Joe Biden, President Biden, a win politically, but it doesn't change some of the decisions potentially might have a conservative majority on that court.
Yeah, it doesn't change the ideological makeup, but we know that what Joe Biden does best is placate to the radical element and the radical progressive base of his party that he believes is the majority. I believe he's incorrect in that. I believe that they're actually the minority. But I'm wondering the kind of justice that he would nominate. Now, again, I'm sure it will be, as Guy said, a black woman. He's got a dedication to that. We saw how well that worked out with Kamala Harris. But here's to hoping that he has a better choice in mind for this position. But I would just hope that he would choose somebody that is not only qualified, but maybe somebody that's not so far on the radical left. I think the American people are making it pretty clear that the wokeism that's going on right now in the Democrat Party is not for them. But I think we need to take a step back, too, and see how we're all projecting politics on the court. And maybe we shouldn't do that so much, especially the media. I mean, just last week you had NPR writing a story about this so-called controversy and debacle between the masking of Neil Gorsuch with Sonia Sotomayor, and they came out and said that that wasn't true. So why are people trying to have so much fighting, so much divide? We should have a moment of unity. I know the court's always going to be a contentious issue, but I think that we need to do a better job of making it less political where we can.
Emily, you know, just in terms of what potentially the court would be looking at, what do we know about maybe what Justice Breyer and his judicial history have looked like, and what Tommy is suggesting is, well, maybe you find somebody farther to the left. Like, if Democrats don't make up if the ideology of Democrats don't make up the majority on the court anyway, would it matter so much if there were somebody who were even farther left than, say, a Sotomayor?
Right, that's a great question. And I will say that this is sort of interesting, and it dovetails in what Guy was saying earlier, that there are rumors floating around already. You know, the short list potentially includes one of the judges that I mentioned earlier, who is presently a circuit court judge, Judge Jackson, and then also that was Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and also California Supreme Court Justice Leondra Kruger, both of those African-American women, both of those Harvard grads, Kaylee. But yes, they are progressive, one appointed by Obama, one appointed by Jerry Brown, squarely Democrat Party. But to your point, Harris, ideologically, yes, they are further to the left than Breyer. However, Breyer's jurisprudence was incredibly progressive, frankly. Right. He was in no way a swing vote by any means. And so I think filling that position would be definitely a square with a square if you chose someone in that ideological bent. And recall as well that as we sort of led up to this moment, there was a respectful distance, frankly, that many in the Democrat Party, including and especially the president, were giving Justice Breyer. Granted, we know and we covered people who were calling outright for him to retire in fear and concern that they would miss that boat. However, this president maintained a distance, and he committed to, he said, filling the federal court vacancies in the lower systems. He has filled over 70 positions, among them now Justice Jackson of the D.C. Circuit Court. So I think what was interesting is that this president played it safely by letting Justice Breyer make this call on his own, and then sort of set this deep bench at the lower circuit and appellate level, so that now from which he can draw. But to Guy's point, yes, he has voiced commitment to African-American judges in the past, and it looks like that short list does include Kruger and Jackson, like I mentioned. And the hearings back in May, by the way, some thought that that was sort of a test case for the potential SCOTUS nomination process for Justice Jackson. And so that might have, frankly, laid the framework for her to be nominated coming up now.
That's really interesting. And you know what else? I mean, look, we don't know. We can't be flies on the room. But does anybody at that level ever make a decision on their own? Like, do you think that he just woke up this morning and said, I'm leaving the court? I mean, everybody sees the politics here. Everybody sees potentially what could happen. Jen Psaki, White House press secretary, tweeted this 9 minutes ago. It has always been the decision of any Supreme Court justice if and when they decide to retire and how they want to announce it. And that remains the case today. We have no additional details or information to share from the White House. Now, I put that there because on the heels of the comment that I had just made. She already sees these questions coming. Did the president talk to him? Like, what's this like, Kaylee?
That's a great point, Harris, because that statement that you just read indicates that, yes, he chose to retire on his own, but was there ever a conversation between Breyer and Biden? There's been a lot of reporting that there was a conversation between Justice Kennedy, who retired, and President Trump at the time, and that Kennedy said, you know, I'd like for Kavanaugh to be considered as my replacement. And as it turned out, that's what transpired. Kavanaugh was the replacement nominated for Kennedy. So were there any such similar discussions? It would not be improper, but it would be interesting to know if that existed and if that changed. You know, Biden's vow to nominate a black female, maybe Breyer had someone in mind, and he said, consider this person. It could have changed the calculus. I will say, I don't think you can overstate how important this moment is for the White House, Harris. I mean, you think about everything happening, everything going wrong, Biden's domestic agenda, Build Back Better being dead in the water, Ukraine, Afghanistan, the southern border, the economy, crime. This is a chance for Biden, in his mind, I would argue, to have a reset, to have a political victory, to change the conversation ahead of the midterms. I think Democrats would prefer to be having a conversation on Roe v. Wade over a conversation on the current issues top of mind of voters, the economy, crime, political unity, according to our Fox News poll. You know, I'm a pro-life Republican. I want to see Roe v. Wade overturned, but I think it is in the mind of Democrats. They would rather switch to that kind of conversation. They want to use this moment to do that. In the Biden administration, desperate for a political win. This could be that for them.
Wow, that is quite a look at this. I mean, Kayleigh, you've been in a White House and dealing with communications and sometimes changing the subject. I mean, it is something that we know that every White House will do. I don't know if this turns the wheel or even a spoke of a wheel away from what's happening in Eastern Europe if Russia now invades Ukraine and those 8,500 troops, United States troops, have to go and be in NATO countries to get ready. And I don't know if this changes anything, our attention away at all. Americans can multitask. Tommy.
Yeah, again, I think that Kayleigh's right. The Biden administration would love to have this kind of a win, but it really is, in essence, an empty virtue signal because it's not going to change much. But that would give them the opportunity to talk about something else. I don't think the American people are that easily distracted, though. It might be one thing if we didn't have empty shelves and worker shortages and inflation and gas prices and foreign policy debacles. Yeah, we have all those things. So it'd be great to say, you know, we put a African-American woman on the Supreme Court. That's a great headline for a couple of weeks. But when you can't afford to buy groceries and your gas prices are going through the roof, I think you're still going to vote for those America First, or hopefully Republicans, in my eyes, conservatives, that are going to make sure that those things can be fixed. So a great win for them optically, but in practice, yeah, I don't think the American people are going to be so sold.